All right. Good morning, everyone. You've made it. It's almost time to go home. It's been a great Dreamforce. I had a lot of fun with the advanced admin flow, the lightning keynote. Been really looking forward to this one because this is kind of the first time we've ever been able to score a developer track session just focused on automation, where we could just get into the code and do some fun stuff. As usual, the forward-looking statement, I'm definitely going to show you a few things we haven't shipped yet. So please make your purchase decisions based on publicly available product and information. So I'm a product manager in our automation group. I'm responsible for Flow Builder, invocable actions, screen components, and the next best action product line that we have brought out this year. You know, I'm not going to spend much time on these slides. If you do need an introduction to this technology, there is some very good material. There are trailheads, and you're not going to get it here. So next best action, now this brand new decisioning layer. So we brought out a decisioning layer earlier this year that complements our flow automation, helps decide what you should do, enabling you to do it with flow. And also, this is also not an introductory course on that. So let's talk about development. One of the trends that I am evangelizing is the idea of actually developing on flow. And one of the things that we like to point to is how internal teams at Salesforce are increasingly developing on flow. What does developing on flow mean? It means that you don't just write straight to Apex. You work some of the process automation infrastructure into your larger application. It doesn't mean you don't write code. And that's a theme that you're going to hear me come back to a lot in this presentation. A lot of times we talk to developers about flow, and they're like, you're trying to get me to switch off of code, and that is not going to happen. That is not the message that we have. The message that you're going to hear is how flow can be a force multiplier for the code you write and allow you to spend more time writing code that matters. So these are sort of different ways, different sort of levels where you can sort of attack the surface of what's possible in the Salesforce ecosystem. And historically, the more you're able to move to higher levels of abstraction, the more productive you can get. It's just why very few of us are still writing assembly code. So there's an opportunity here if you as a developer can retain the power and the flexibility you get from code and wrap around it some of these higher level services. And some of that opportunity is being taken, but like I said, by teams inside of Salesforce. These are actual clouds here at Salesforce that have shipped primary frontline functionality on flow. For example, a month ago, Lightning Order Management was announced. That's from Commerce Cloud. If you are a customer of Lightning Order Management, you install it, it gets turned on, you will see flow show up. Things like return processing are implemented not as a traditional go to setup, click some checkboxes piece of highly internal, non-public technology. They are implemented as flows. And one of the primary reasons that the Commerce Cloud team decided to do that was their customers needed to be able to customize at a rate faster than Salesforce can deliver those setup checkboxes. So this is a trend inside of Salesforce. We also have a lot of the clouds in the industries group are making available business processes that ship sometimes in managed packages, sometimes just right as part of core Salesforce that work on flow. And this plays into this spectrum. Almost everywhere you're going to hear a message that's very polar about Salesforce. We've got this fabulous declarative environment, point and click, enabling admins to do amazing things. It's what I remember attracting me to Salesforce in 2003 when I started using it as a startup executive. And we've got this great pro code environment, which is getting better and better. The SFDX stuff has just made it so much nicer. But not a lot of people talk about what's in between, and that's where we're going to focus on today. So let's dive into some of this and talk about how you can take the code you're writing and turn it into reusable building blocks. and then how you can use that ability to put stuff into building blocks to push customization and management deeper into the organization, which is a theme that we're getting a lot of interest in, because like developers are the ultimate bottleneck, then admins can do a lot, but then even admins become a bottleneck. The businesses want all these changes, they want all these customizations. I want to show you how you can tie this together and write code that actually can be managed and configured deep in the organization by non-admins. And then part of the goodness of this whole approach of building blocks is the ecosystem, the network effect of having reusable building blocks. Somebody else writes it, you get to benefit from it. Maybe you make a change, maybe you make a pull request, and that gets added to it. You're going to see that, Salesforce, we've got some great open source projects, but by and large, I don't feel that Salesforce has, the App Exchange is not a place where you go to get small, reusable tools that you can work into your own development process. We're getting better at that in many ways. There are Git repositories in a lot of places with Salesforce Tech. This is another place where you can do this. You're going to see how there are actions that you can pull right into your workflows so that you just don't have to reinvent them from scratch. So the core technology at the heart of this sort of gospel that I'm preaching here, if you'll forgive me, is invocable actions. I believe this is the most, this is sort of the best kept secret, the most underappreciated power of Salesforce is invocable actions. And if you are a developer, you can take advantage of invocable actions. What it does is it takes code and it turns it into building blocks that admins can use. Admins who don't know code, admins who have never seen a development environment in their life. You can create a highly customized Apex class or JavaScript. This also works in JavaScript, an even better kept secret. And you can turn this into a building block. What you see on the left is an Apex class. What you see in the center is that Apex class surfacing as an action inside a flow builder. And then what you see on the right is a list of all of the Apex actions. I'm going to use interchangeably Apex actions, invocable actions. All of the invocable actions that are on this org show up here. This is in Flow Builder, but Flow Builder is just one of 4 different build tools that can already support your invocable action. So if you write this Apex class and turn this into this invocable action, it shows up in all 4 of these tools. It shows up in Bot Builder, it shows up in Process Builder, and it shows up in Strategy Builder. So you're getting some leverage there. Write once, let all of your admins use it all over your organization. Okay, so let's look at an example. Rich HTML email. So the business units want to send email that they consider to be normal email. They want it to have formatting. They want to be able to attach things to it. They'd like to be able to use the 2 different kinds of Salesforce email templates to do this. This is not an unreasonable business request. So you look into it, and you quickly determine that Flow has right out of the box great ability to send email, but there is some bad news, which is that the built-in email action is pretty weak. It's only plain text. It doesn't have support for attachments. It doesn't have support for templates. We just have not yet been able to prioritize addressing that. We've been too busy building the new Flow Builder and creating some other stuff that I'll get to share with you. So you are a developer, though, so the first thing you do is you go and you look at what APIs are available for you to work with, and you very quickly see that Salesforce has a fine set of email sending services that you can basically just use for free, subject to limits, depending on org size, but you can send a fair amount of emails, and you can see here that you've got the ability to do attachments, you can write in rich text, you can pass in, you can use things like org-wide email addresses, and you can use Salesforce IDs. So you're quickly thinking, I can whip up an Apex class, I can build an app that sends these emails, which is great. It won't take you too long because you know how to write Apex. But of course, there are ramifications. Every time you build an app and you meet a business requirement, one of the issues is you have to generally provide customization. You have to provide a UI. How are all these admins going to pick which attachments they are going to send in their emails? How are they going to specify which of their templates they're going to use? And so you say, well, I can do that. I can build Lightning Web Components. And you end up having a choice of building it all yourself and having another app that you have to support, and you become potentially the bottleneck for any changes and improvements that your business unit's very happy for about a day, and then they start asking you for more features, right? So you basically, using the traditional paradigm, you can give your business units the fish, but you haven't really taught them how to fish. You've basically taught them to come to you to solve their problems. So let me show you an alternative. So I have a flow here, and the key thing to look at is that action in the lower right. I've labeled it send HTML email, and let's double click on it. It's got a lot of input parameters, and let's just go see. I'm going to run this, and it's done running. And now let's go to my demo inbox. And it should show up. Yep. No, it's not showing up yet. Come on, come on, come on. I'm doing a live demo. Well, you can see. I'll show you from my test, from my earlier test sends. You can see this is the kind of email that's coming through. So I have access to. I have plenty of access to rich email capabilities here. I've got links. I've got all of that, and okay, and my flow is reporting back that there's a problem. So I can go here, I can run and debug. Let's see if it tells me what the problem is. And my limit is exceeded. How about that? My scratch org finally hit its limit, because scratch orgs, apparently they don't want developers doing lots of mass emailing from scratch orgs. But useful in a way, because one thing I was able to just demonstrate to you is how quickly I was able to debug that problem in the infrastructure. I didn't have to go to my Apex debug log. In this case, I went to my flow debug environment and showed that. So what we have here is I've written Apex code, but I've packaged it as an invocable action. I've deployed it in a flow, and it shows up in the builder. I dragged it out. Now, all these other things in this flow are feeding my invocable action. And one of the nice things about this is that it is someone who is not you that is doing that part of it. So the endless customization of which attachment I want, and can I create a version that does this on a scheduled basis, and all of that can be done declaratively in flow. And so you get leverage out of the development that you're doing. So you also have advantages like versioning in the sense that you are creating loosely coupled technology here. Your code that's doing your back-end heavy lift of sending the email is completely isolated from all of this front-end presentation stuff. This flow could be changed to create screens, and those screens could be presented to users, and users could be filling them out to feed your code. Meanwhile, you can be versioning and changing your Apex class, and you don't have to change this flow. It will just pick up the latest version of Apex if you deploy it, if you feel comfortable deploying it. And as long as you use standard development best practices of not screwing with your interface and just incrementally adding to your interface, you won't break anybody's existing integrations in flow, because you just changed. You just added to the interface, and if you have to actually change the interface, you know what? You just provide a different invocable action. And this older invocable action keeps working. So that's kind of powerful. You also can take this whole yarn ball of flow elements and your invocable action, and you can make it a template. That's just a checkbox that you click in setup. And when it's a template, and you can do this with a managed package, you can do this just in your organization. If you make it a template, it will show up when the admins go to create a new flow, it'll show up right there as something they can just pick, so that they don't start with a blank canvas. They start with your whole crafted template that's right there. Now, if you're an ISV, you can, or if you're just packaging this for some of the many orgs you have to maintain, you can put this into your own package. If you put a template into a managed package, then what happens is your customers can clone it and customize it locally, but you can still push upgrades to the original version. So you have some flexibility there. All right, and a final point that I threw in here is that Flow makes it easy to add telemetry. Not as easy as it should be. We're working on that. It should be more automatic, but you can have a little, you can have Flow elements here that are writing log data, that are sending log data, that are pushing log information elsewhere. So how do you do this? It's very easy to turn code into these building blocks. The main magic is this little invocable method in annotation. You add that to one of your methods, it will show up in those 4 builders. The second step is to figure out how you're going to expose your inputs and your outputs. So just like any method takes input parameters and can have return values, the same thing with a class that's designed to work as a building block. So what I'm doing here is I'm following a recommended practice of wrapping all of my input parameters in an inner class, which I just called request here. The default interface only can sort of accept one thing, but if that one thing you pass it is a class like this, then you have the ability to pass as many different inputs as you want. And the same thing happens with the data that you are returning from your action. So I've created an inner class called response, and that, in this case, all I am passing back is a couple of status variables, which, as you saw in my example, were very useful in me quickly debugging a limits problem that I might have really been scratching my head about. So now, a characteristic of the invocable action interface is that it expects lists and it gives back lists. And one of the reasons why it does this is we wanted to make sure that it was optimized for bulkification scenarios where you're passing a big list of data. A lot of times in practice, when I'm just building demos and the like, I don't actually send full lists of data. So a lot of times what I find myself doing is I have to pack one set of data into my list structure, and then once I get into my apex, I have to pull it right out by taking that 0th item in the list. And that gives me the input values that came from the flow or came from the process builder or et cetera, et cetera. And so after you have your inputs, you then have the core. That's where your core code now goes. This is the core code for that send HTML email. By the way, all of the code you're seeing here is available already. It's published in a blog post on the website Unofficial SF. I'll have the URL for that on a slide later on. So there's a full blog post about this, and all this source is available on a GitHub repo where we put a lot of flow actions and flow components. So this is all going to be available for you to look at and maybe improve upon. So this is all, I'm setting up this mail data structure, and usually the sort of important moment of an invocable action is either an Apex call or a RESTful call out, and both work very well. In this case, it's that send email call right there. That's where I'm calling an existing Salesforce API to do the actual send job. And then there's a final piece, which is basically packaging up the return values to hand back out for use downstream in the flow or the bot session or whatever. So all of these blocks, once you create them, you can keep them private. You can put them in unmanaged packages, and I would love to encourage you to essentially publish them over on Unofficial SF, where we are trying to create the sort of directory of all of the actions that you can just install into your organization. And some of these are like, one of the most popular of these is a simple little action that people can stick at the end of their flows that navigates you finish the flow, it navigates to another S object or another list view or another web page. Someday we're going to get that into the core flow product, but we haven't yet, so this installable action extends what you can do. And that's really awesome because the ability to extend Salesforce and leverage your code just gives you a lot of tools. This is the sort of the unofficial invocable action homepage. We've got great official documentation for this, but there's a lot that we just can't fit into the official documentation, examples, videos. So this is a good place to start to find out more. And there were also a couple of other sessions here at Dreamforce that were talking about invocable actions. So word's getting around, and I'm looking forward to watching those. In fact, there's one they scheduled at this exact same slot. Okay, let's move on. You've turned your code into building blocks. I want to show you a very cool pattern for getting more leverage out of your code by enabling people that aren't even admins to be the ones setting the customization. And that I'm just calling record-based configuration. So how are we going to do this? The use case I'm going to give you is your sales managers want to prioritize what their salespeople work on. They want the salespeople to come in the morning and see exactly the opportunities that the managers think they should work on. That sounds like a pretty useful thing. So you've got two questions here as a developer. How do you come up with a way to create sales priorities, and then how do you let sales team leaders who are not known for the sophisticated depth of their technical experience be able to change these priorities? So let me demonstrate good morning salesperson. And let's see, where did let's go this way. Okay, so we start from the perspective of salesperson Ricky Roma. And Ricky has come in the morning, and you can see that Ricky sees an efficient, compact component here that is telling him what he should work on. If he clicks on one of those thumbs up, it's going to run a flow. So he's being served recommendations. And those recommendations are prioritized by his manager, Blake Baldwin. So Blake Baldwin wants to change up the prioritization. So how does he do that? Well, he sees a set of opportunities. There's a lot of ways he could prioritize Ricky's time here. He could prioritize it by the Einstein score, by days to close, a sector. There's a lot of things he might want to do. Now, what this app has done is it's defined a very simple custom object that's just called a sales tactical plan. Nothing fancy about this. Every field that's currently on it, you can see right there. So it's got a field called tactical ordering. Now, what Blake can do is click this button, it runs a flow. If you didn't know, you can put flows onto quick action buttons and have them launch just like that from a record page. So Blake goes and says, I want to manage the tactical priorities. And he says, you know what? I really want to prioritize revenue, just want to focus on opportunity value. What we're using here is a flow screen component. This is an example of what you can get by tapping into the community. We haven't had time yet to put the dual list box into the out-of-the-box set of components that come with Flow. But this is published to Unofficial SF and can be installed. And it was very easy to wrap an existing Lightning component and turn it into a Flow-enabled component. That's a topic for another session. Okay, so Blake clicks, he's changed this, and the tactical ordering has changed. Now, Blake doesn't necessarily need to see any of these details. He needed to be able to see this button and get to this button and change it. So if we go now to Ricky, and Ricky comes in the next day, and we'll just refresh. And Ricky's recommendations are different. And you can see that now we're prioritizing Maturin and Bologna, and if we look, you can see that that makes sense because Maturin is 52,000, Bologna's 43,000, and the other two opportunities don't have any value at all. So how are we doing this? Where is the code in all this? Let's go take a look at what we built here. This started out architecturally. We identified sales tactics, 4 of them that are currently working here. But of course, the architecture is designed so more and more tactics could be added, and the tactics could get more sophisticated. But for demo purposes, I came up with these 4 tactics, and I created this custom object, and you can see it's got. So this is basically just what you already saw. So what's going on here is there is a flow that is running every time Ricky loads his user page. And that flow is reading in the appropriate tactical plan record. So in this case, it's looking to see who Ricky's manager is, and then it's looking to see which tactical plan is associated with that manager by name. Very straightforward stuff. It finds one. It says, okay, this is the tactical plan. It's then passing that one value there that says tactical ordering, that simple little comma-separated list. It's passing that via an invocable action to the NBA engine, the next best action strategy engine, which is available now as another endpoint, an Apex accessible endpoint that you can call to run a next best action strategy, which, by the way, every organization is already enabled for and gets 5,000 free requests a month. So unlike a lot of Einstein technologies, Einstein Next Best Action, very easy to get started with and doesn't require any enablement or like data manipulation. So the Next Best Action strategy gets run up on Salesforce. It returns back a complex data structure. That data structure is then passed by the flow into a Lightning Web component. So that is how we get this UI. This is a Lightning Web component. And if we take a look at the flow, this is the actual flow that's running on that user page. So the flow, it's doing a little orchestration here, but it's not doing heavy lifting. The heavy lifting was done visually by the developer who wrote that little custom display component, and it's being done by the invocable action that knows how to make the call to the strategy engine, and it's being done by the strategy, which we can also take a look at. So if you look at this screen, you can see that all it is this little Lightning Web component, which is also available. Both this action and this component are available in that same repo and via blog post. So it's passing in, and you can see right down here, it's passing in cur recommendations. And if we look here, you can see that this Apex action is returning cur recommendations. So the data is flowing out, and the flow is sort of a substrate that allows you to use these loosely coupled objects to create applications of considerable power. So this is the Apex endpoint. When I think of like all of these Apex methods, like as a Flow product manager, I'm like, I can't wait for there to be an invocable action for every single thing you can call via code in Salesforce, because it's just, there's too much value in taking something like this, buried in the next best action class of the Connect API, super powerful. By making it invocable action, we're exposing it much more broadly. Now, this is the next best action strategy. I don't have time in this session to get into next best action. Hopefully, you had a chance to get an intro to this at one of the other sessions. There's a lot of information about next best action in the same place, and I will just show you real quickly. This is that site, and this will also point you to all of the official documentation. So it's a good one-stop shop. So just quickly, what's happening here? The ordering is taken in as an input parameter by the recommendation strategy. Each of those generate nodes, you know what it's doing? What generate does? is it calls an invocable action. So again, what we are doing here, let's see if I can bring this up. So that same invocable action technology is being used to generate recommendations dynamically. So I go here to setup, and that's the wrong org. Okay. Got too many orgs going on here. Here it is. Okay, so when I click on one of these generates, do you see right here? It's basically just a wrapper for all of my invocable actions. This org has 4 of them. And when you select an invocable action, it's smart enough to detect what the inputs are to let you map stuff from other places in the solution. So the invocable actions, each of these is calling the strategy engine. The results are being sorted. Then there's some dupe detection that's done. And then that's filtered. So there's a whole bunch of sort of decisioning refinement here that's taking advantage of various features that are in the next best action environment. And you know what? I mean, you know, my time is going by so fast. I have so many things I want to show you. If I zip through some of this, I hope that when you're trying to decide whether to give me a 1 or a 5, keep in mind that this is also being recorded. So the more we can pack into the last 8 minutes of this, the more posterity will be able to benefit from my wisdom. That was a joke. Okay, so wanted to talk briefly about how the loose coupling works. One of the things you may have been asking is, how can something as rich as a set of recommendations coming back from an API simply get handed across the LWC boundary? Because LWCs, they support basically simple data types like strings and booleans and the like. This data structure, this is no fancier than what you see from any web API that you're getting back. You know, you get back this NBA recommendation structure, and then it's got something called a recommendation. There's a list of them. So you've got N of these recommendations, and then they've got some abstract types that they then map to some concrete types. So the data structure that comes back here is relatively sophisticated, but notice here what I've got in my target config in my Lightning Web component. This is brand new. In addition to all those strings and booleans, I am surfacing on my Lightning Web component something with an apex prefix. So this is brand new, and it only works right now in flow screens, but if you are targeting the flow substrate for your Lightning Web component, you can not only pass collections of S objects, you can pass any apex-defined type. So in this case, I've got an apex-defined type called NBA recommendations list. And as you briefly saw, you can, this is back in Flow Builder, you're able to see apex-defined types at the declarative point-and-click level. So I can take an Apex class, I can do this magic I'm about to show you, turning it into an exposed Apex-defined type. And then admins suddenly see that as something that they can retrieve and pass around and deal with declaratively. So in the case of this example, because I can do that, I was able to decouple my back-end invocable action that's calling the recommendation strategy from my front-end LWC. Now, of course, I could have done it in one yarn ball. I could have had my LWC with all of this baked-in NBA goodness. But because I can loosely couple it, I now have much more flexible individual tools for the use in the future. So how you do this, the key to exposing Apex data structures in Flow and LWC is good old Aura enabled. If you put Aura enabled on the attribute, on the property of an Apex class, it will suddenly, that class will suddenly start showing up in places like the lower left pull down inside of Flow. It'll just magically start showing up. Now, there's 2 reasons this is exciting. you might be looking at this and saying, I'm not like totally overwhelmed by this example, Alex, because you're using an existing Apex call to the NBA engine. I mean, aren't you kind of using internal knowledge on this? And the answer is, everything I'm talking about, this ability to map rich nested data into an Apex type that can be used on a point-and-click basis and in a loosely coupled way, also works for any JSON structure. So you can create an invocable action that makes a web callout. The one on the left is data you'd get back if you call DocuSign, and the one on the right is just a piece of data you might get back if you called Intuit's APIs. So as you know, all web APIs basically return a big nested piece of JSON. And until now, the only way you could work with that is full code, XML parsing, JSON parsing. Not that hard and not a big challenge for any developer. But what's nice about this approach is you can push it to your admins. So what you're basically doing with web data is you take the JSON data structure, you use a converter like this JSON to Apex website, and what it does is it gives you a corresponding Apex class definition. You're going to load that into your org as a sort of template. So I created this template. This is an actual, I don't have time to show the demo, but this is an actual working example that I showed at TDX. So the video is online. I've got this data structure on the left came back from a MuleSoft API call. And I took that and I generated these Apex classes, threw them into my org, added the Aura-enabled indicator to them. And then I went and was able to build this application. And what this application did was it took the results of this getProducts API call and it created 3 product records. And all of the parsing that normally would have to be done by code, in this particular case, was done by this flow. So the action that made the API call out is right here. So this is what's calling out to MuleSoft, which is calling out to something else, bringing back God knows what from what enterprise backend system. And then I was able to declaratively start to pull data structures out of that JSON blob, and then I was doing loops over them in a declarative way. Now, again, I'm not saying this is better than how you might do this in Apex or Node or whatever, but going at it this way means that 6 months from now, when somebody is like, oh, you know what I want to do? I want to change the way that record is created. I want to add one more field that's coming out. They can potentially go and just modify the flow. And that's one more piece of code maintenance you don't have to handle. All right. So here is a URL to learn more about Apex-defined data types. There's a good blog post on Unofficial SF. There's a couple great ones that have been done by members of the larger Flow community. So I encourage you to take a look at that. And this presentation, by the way, will also be available. This will be recorded. It usually it took about a month last year for all of them to get on. So I'm about out of time, which is unfortunate because I had more material. But what I will do is very briefly talk about some of the other things that are coming to the world of actions. We are about to fill two of the last 3 gaps, in my opinion, that our invocable actions solution has. The first is custom property editors. So if you go back to this example of send HTML email, you may have been thinking, if you were thinking with your developer hat, you're like, hey, wow, this is interesting. It's kind of point and click. There's pop-ups and stuff. But if you're thinking like an admin, this is not a very friendly UI. They're all text fields. There's no checkboxes. You can't do pick lists. You can't do radio buttons. This baseline one-size-fits-all interface is the only way you can expose that action today to your declarative users in the organization. But we are about to solve that we're about to do a sort of leapfrog from last to first kind of solution by allowing you to take a separate LWC and glue that to your action as its property editor. So what you're seeing is the same environment, but what you're seeing on the right, this isn't custom Salesforce internal code. This is LWCs that I wrote and that I had some help. We wrote, and that when this action is surfaced, the Salesforce goes, oh, I see that the person who wrote this invocable action has a property editor for it. And so your property editor then shows up with as much friendliness. You can call out, you can put images, everything you can do in LWC, which is basically everything you can do with the web, you can do now as the UI for your portable, loosely coupled, fully packageable, fully distributable, declaratively usable action. And so this is what I mean when I say that this environment really lets you get a lot more out of your code investment. And so that's coming. And then the other big gap that you're going to get to start to play with, that's going to be in pilot, by the way, the custom property editors. So if you want to play with that in spring, you're going to need to say, hey, support, turn that on. And then they'll turn that on for you. You shouldn't have to do pilot. You shouldn't have to do anything special to use new support for generic S objects. This is something that is going to manifest in, Apex can support generic S objects. And I know I'm going over, so feel free to walk out, even though this is such important information to your career. But by all means, just head on home. So we have not been able to build these once and distribute them to everybody, basic collection operators, because Flow cannot work with generic S objects. That means that if you want to do a filter Apex action, you have to do a filter Apex action for accounts. And then you have to do a separate filter Apex action for contacts, and so on and so forth. And every custom object type you do, you have to go do a separate one. So we've fixed that. We have enhanced Flow. And now what's going to happen is you basically are going to be able to create actions. And if you have an S object collection parameter on your Apex class, when someone drags it into Flow, Flow will say, oh, which one do you want it to be this time? And the person who's building the Flow will decide at design time, oh, well, this time I want it to be my sales team policy S object. And then it will say, okay, locking down, pulling in the right attributes, and now I will be an instance of that. So every time you instantiate one of these generic enabled actions, it will be able to be assigned to different types, and you'll be able to do that for every individual input and every individual output. And so what we anticipate is as soon as we ship that, we're going to be able to put all of these out. And once these are out, admins are going to, a lot of things that currently take 5 looping elements or 6 different assignments and 5 decision elements are going to be solvable with one useful action. And so we really, again, that network effect, and I have to wrap up because we're just out of time, but that network effect is going to be very powerful. Later on this year, we're going to give some similar love to the screen environment. Screen components are going to get the same ability to have a custom property editor. And they're also going to get the same ability to support generics. So we're finally going to be able to have a data table component that works for everything. Eric has been, adding tons of value to the data table component that we have up on Unofficial SF, but it still doesn't work with every custom object. That will end, and then we will also be able to put really nice UIs on top of all of those screen components. And sections and columns is going to make the screen a much richer environment in terms of layout and positioning and styling. So great stuff coming here. Here's a little snapshot of what sections and columns is going to let you do. Really looking forward to that. We also are looking to streamline the user experience of the flow canvas to make it easier and more accessible. Some of the things that Process Builder does, you're going to be able to do inside of Flow Builders. All of the triggers that you currently have to go to Process Builder for, you're now going to be able to do natively in Flow Builder, simplifying that process as well. There's also a lot of stuff happening on the engine side, analytics, metrics, tracking, and we're gearing up to take debugging to the next level. A lot of the guys back at the shop are very excited about our sort of V2 debugging. Just wanted to mention Eric's here, Jen's here, some people who have been adding a tremendous amount of value. If you're not already aware of Automation Hour, Jen and her colleagues have been doing webinars for a long time. There's a tremendous amount of value there. Eric is an example of someone who is just doing work, adding and enhancing components. Love that. Please, if you see any improvements that you want to make to any of these actions, do it. Put a pull request in there. We love it. Don't worry about whether it's good enough. You know, if necessary, we'll work with you on it. But really want to create a community here. Oh, I love this. They're ramping up the volume on me to get me off the stage. They did that last year, too. I guess I'm a slow learner.